hello to everybody who joined us today. Thank you for taking the time to join us on this fine Saturday for the second part of our chapter president training. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started with the presentation today. Of course, last week we went over, we kicked off with the first part of a chapter president training, general responsibilities and resources. If you did not get the link to the recording or the slides, please send me a message or email so that I can send that to you directly. Again, if you did not get those links to the recording, it's also on our YouTube page, KKSci TV. So this part here, we're going to dive a little bit deeper because so much of what's happening right now is sort of up in the air. We really have no consistency from week to week, day to day, because so many things are changing. So today, something that was important to our district presidents was to go over planning and how to plan effectively, efficiently, and equitably as we go through these uncertain times. So if you haven't already, go ahead and mute yourselves just to make sure that the audio is clear for everybody. I would encourage you all to turn your cameras on once the presentation it has started, but that's up to you. I won't force you to do so. I just ask that you show up however you think is best for you as a representative for your university, for your band program, and for your chapter, okay? If you do have questions, please go ahead and find the chat box and make sure that you utilize that function, and the DPs will work together to monitor that. And then I'll also say, if you want to use private messaging, that's okay as well. Just know that I will see it on my end, and I really don't need to know your business. So just be smart about what you share. But other than that, this is being recorded. We will share the slides and recording out with everybody. If you are really struggling with what you want to accomplish, what you want to plan for, what support you might need, please reach out. We can only help with what we know. We don't know what we don't know. So on the national front, on the district front, if you do have questions, if you do need further support, please reach out, okay? Any questions before we start? Audio is fine, audio is clear for everybody? Okay. Well, without further ado, I will go ahead and turn this over to our district presidents for their presentation.
Hello, everyone. How's it going? Bong, can you make it so I can screen share?
No. Yes. Okay, you're good now.
Cool. Sweet. Can everyone see a micro and macro planning screen?
Yes.
Sweet. So for starting off, we're going to do a little bit of introductions. My name is Jacob Coughlin. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the Midwest District Chapter President from the Epsilon Omega chapter at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Keep my cool band photos there. Up next, we have...
That's me. So my name is Nicole Gage. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Western District President. I'm from the Nu Sigma chapter, and that is at Cal Poly Pomona in Southern California.
So moving on, just some quick info. We would want to kind of tie this back into last week's series. So last week we talked a lot about what your duties are. This presentation will kind of give you some more tangible and applicable ways in which you can accomplish it, as well as we talked about our leadership tool belt type idea. And this is kind of how you will use those strengths within the real world situations. So as Bong had mentioned, if you have any questions, either one, feel free to take notes. If they're like long-term questions, to ask at the end when we have our discussion, or if it's a short, quick question, feel free to shoot in the chat, and Nicole and I will help moderate that. So for the first half of our presentation today, we're going to talk on the micro level. So the idea of an effective chapter meeting. We're going to view this from the point of view of how your agenda would look and how your event or agenda affects chapter meetings. So for a brief overview, we are splitting it up into before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting, as well as helpful tips like going on at the end. So for before the meeting, some things, and these are more just like tidbits ideas. Obviously, I know a lot of us use agendas, and this might be just a slightly different way of using it, or potentially just a few more ideas you might have. So one thing that could help, if your chapter doesn't do this already, you could have online submissions of new business. So what I mean by this is having most likely a Google form that is open 24/7 throughout the week, to allow chapter members to submit items of business before the meeting starts and before the agenda is written. Obviously, you're not going to take away the opportunity for students to bring up new business during the meeting, but by allowing the opportunity for students to submit new business beforehand, it allows you as the president, number one, the ability to time your meeting better because you will know roughly how long new business will be. It also gives you the ability to think through some of the discussion that might have to be had, because for those of us who have been chapter presidents before, the worst feeling in the world is someone goes, "Hi, can we talk about this?" And your response goes, "I guess so." It gives you an opportunity to have some of those thoughts beforehand. Similar to the first point, request officer and chair reports. This number one helps with your timing and helps with how long you think the meeting might go, as well as it encourages your chapter officers or chairs to think through what they're going to talk about before they talk about it. So it's just a way to kind of help the ebb and flow of things. At that point, the next step would be to write a preliminary agenda. So this is usually you want to have it done 2 or 3 days before your meeting. So like, let's say, for example, if your meetings are on Sundays, having your preliminary agenda done by about Thursday evening, Friday morning is super helpful. At that point, sending it out to your exec council is super helpful for their approval/revision. Number one, this will help your chapter officers, one, confirm what they wrote, and like when you give them the request reports, confirm that it was there and is there correctly. Number two, when you guys get time to have discussion, they will have had more time to think about this and will be able to assist you in leading a discussion. And number three, it helps with some of the super small things like, hey, you misspelled this word. Because whether or not we think it's a big deal, you always feel really dumb when you send something out with a spelling or a grammar typo in it, or grammar typo in it. So it's helpful to have another set of eyes. At that point, you'll make any edits you need for your final draft. Final draft is in quotations because, as we all know, final drafts are only final until something else pops up, which is always totally fine. Know that the agenda can change at any moment because there's a good chance I have a final, if my meeting's on Sunday, that I have a final draft and it was all great and dandy. And then Sunday, an hour before the meeting, we find out marching band's canceled for the year. I don't know. Obviously, that's going to drastically change what you were talking about, and that's totally okay. But on your, in quotations, final draft, getting it out to the entire chapter at least 24 hours before the meeting. The purpose of this, similar for the reason you sent it to the exec council beforehand, it allows chapter members to see what they're going to be talking about and potentially prepare some of their own opinions on these discussions before the meeting starts. This will hopefully lead to better discussion, as well as it allows chapter members to better expect the time length of the meeting, kind of the pace of meeting, and what they're going to be looking for. So these are kind of steps for before the meeting. Moving into the during the meeting section, first and foremost, I personally believe it's a very good idea to display the agenda during the meeting for all members to see. So for this year, with a lot of our chapter meetings most likely being on Zoom, this would be similar to a screen share type situation. Or if you are in person or in person in the future, having it projected behind you as you're giving your presentation. Similar to a lot of things I mentioned beforehand, it allows members to see what's coming, prep questions, prep conversation, as well as it kind of has the timing of things. If you're still doing officer reports, 30 minutes into your hour-long meeting, it kind of lets everyone know it's time to start speeding things up. So just good for that purpose. The next one is, or that kind of contradicts itself when saying try to stick to your agenda, but also be willing to be flexible if needed. It's like, great, Jacob, why did you bother making that statement? So going into depth about it a little bit, try to stick to your agenda in terms of the ordering of things, where you wanted to go with that. So if we were starting with officer reports, always do officer reports, then move into then like new business, old business, whatever you guys have set up as your system, always use that system and don't stray from it. Don't start talking about officer reports and then talk about something else, then go back to our officer reports. It's hard for members to keep track. Now, that's what I mean by that. Now, when I say try to stick to your agenda, some people will take that as, so we can't talk about anything that's not on the agenda, right? Not necessarily. As I said, if something pops up, you need to have the ability to be flexible and come within and have conversations that might not have been planned. And those are okay. So a few things in order to help keep meetings moving. Number one, if your chapter uses Robert's Rules of Order, that's a super successful way of kind of moving conversation along. These slides will be shared out later, and that's why I have this little Google Doc attached to this. It's a PDF. It's a PDF of some super basic Robert's Rules of Order. If I want to make a motion, how do I do it? And it's just a 2-page PDF of like, what do I need to say? What does that mean? What does the presiding officer do? So it's kind of a way, if your chapter doesn't use Robert's Rules of Order too much, it's a good way to kind of start using some of the things. It's a really walkthrough step. And when these slides are sent out, you can kind of look through that and see what it means. The challenging part about using Robert's Rules of Order is it addresses the fact that you're going to need to have a strong president or a strong parliamentarian who's willing to address some of the common issues that show up, such as circle talking or non-pertinent information. I don't know, I'm sure all of us have sat in a chapter meeting where the president will say, what are your guys' opinion on X topic? Person 1 raises their hand, gives a 3-minute explanation of here's my opinion. Person 2 raises their hand, gives another 3-minute explanation about the exact same thing the first person just said. Whereas they could have just as easily said, I fully agree with person number 1. And it's of each person explaining. So it's having a chapter parliamentarian or chapter president who is strong enough and firm enough in their position to. It can also, actually that's coming up a little bit later. So that's kind of the during the meeting topics. After the meeting. So for after the meeting, send out the minutes virtually to the entire chapter within 48 hours. I use that 48-hour mark because after 48 hours is when most of the chapter members will start to completely forget what happened 2 days ago. So if you want the chapter members to actually be able to be like, yes, that's what we said, there has to be a time limit in which you send it. After that, virtually storing your minutes somewhere for all chapter members to access, whether it's Google Drive, Box, etc. Very helpful. And people are like, why? No one's going to read them. Well, I will agree. The majority of the chapter probably might not go back and read minutes from the last year. What's super helpful is for positions or projects you guys are working on, especially if they're yearly projects, seeing the discussions before and after them as you start to plan for the next one. For example, I know that a large majority of Kappa chapters run some sort of band banquet for either their marching band or their band program, usually held about the same time every year. If I was the next band banquet chair, being able to go back and read what kind, like for example, when did the committee first meet last year? You can read through minutes and start to, or what were the problems that came up last year with this? Being able to go back and read the minutes from like a specific time frame can be super helpful. So therefore having those be able to be accessed is super helpful. So in terms of the vote or read and vote on meetings or at the minutes of the next meeting, I would assume most chapters who have minutes probably do some sort of passing of the minutes to start each meeting. I kind of wanted to have a little bit of discussion on the vote versus reader vote. Typically speaking, it's said that in order to pass a set of minutes, they have to be read beforehand, in terms of like formal Robert's Rules of Order. And that is typically speaking correct. But I'm not going to be the first to say reading an entire set of minutes is not necessarily the most fun way to start a meeting. So through some research, I've actually found that if you make the minutes virtually accessible to every member, that is considered the equivalent of reading them, because each member would have the opportunity to read through them if they so would like. So you are not required to read the minutes as long as they are virtually sent to the entire chapter. So for those of you who are like, we hate this, do we have to do this? There's a little bit of information on that, and you can take that as you so may. If you want to read them, go for it. Maybe chapters like it. I know mine didn't, so that's why we started doing some research on it. Finally, we just have some pretty simple, helpful hints that can go into this. For starters, try to experiment with some different types of agendas and see what works best for your chapter. Putting things in different orders, maybe starting with new business before you do officer reports. And by different types, I mean, there's some agendas that are super detailed and like ask questions within the agenda. There are some questions that are just the general topics. So if your chapter doesn't have a hard set, this is how we do agendas, feel free to experiment with it and see kind of where your chapter could improve on this. Number one, have an end time to your meetings and plan your agenda to end on time or early. The worst part about having a meeting is when it starts having no idea when it's going to end. For the presidents, we're like, cool, that's what we expect. We're the presidents for organization. For most of our general members, though, it's very frustrating to have to show up to something where they don't know when they're done. Or we're typically done around 8, and as soon as it hits about 8:15, I can tell you no one else wants to be there. But if you have a time, we are starting at 7 p.m., we're going to end at 8:30. Cool. People know that. People plan for that. Now that they plan for that, you can't go over. So that's why when you're writing your agenda, plan to end on time or plan to end 10 minutes before you say you're going to end. So if there's 10 more minutes of conversation, it's not the end of the world. People will never be offended if you let them out 10 minutes early. They're going to be pretty offended if you let them out 10 minutes late. Moving on to the next point, explain your idea for the flow of meetings early in the year, even if it's the same as last year. This kind of comes to the concept of, it's great if you have great ideas in your head, but until you're able to voice that great idea to your chapter, it doesn't mean anything to them. And as I said, even if it's the same as last year, there's still a whole class of new members that you guys most likely put in who aren't quite used to this system yet. So taking some time during your first or second meeting to just be like, hey guys, here's my plan for how we're going to run through how we're going to run through our meetings. Here's the sections. Here's how we want to see each section ran. That's the plan. Well, that amount of communication at the very beginning will make it so much easier for your meetings for the rest of the year. Finally, my last little tidbit on effective meetings, and this is, yes, technically an effective meeting tip, but more importantly, it's kind of a how to lead a good meeting more of a type tip, and that's while presiding over a meeting, never or almost never let your opinion be the first one shared. I say that because as the president of your chapter, when you walk in and say, hi guys, we're going to talk about this, and here's how I feel, what do you think? You almost automatically prevent the opposite opinion from being shared if someone has it, because I don't want to, like, if I was a regular chapter member, I don't want to be the chapter member that just tells you guys how to do things. Or I don't want to tell the president that you're wrong. That's a really hard feeling, and most people won't do that. So even if they have an opposite opinion, they'll just sit there quietly. So try to set up your meetings where you're allowed to say, here's this topic, here's a few guiding questions, what are your guys' thoughts? And the conversation will go as it goes. Different people share different opinions. And then at that point, you have the opportunity to, if needed to, maybe inject some opinion to kind of finalize the discussion, because sometimes we get circle talking going, we see a lot of different ideas. Maybe interjecting your opinion could be a good way to bring it to a close. That's totally cool. But you allow people the opportunity to share their opinions. Also, you can kind of, similar to presiding over meetings, this also kind of goes into how you preside over the meeting. The difference between asking, like, are there any questions? Or do you guys have questions about this? This kind of last point was kind of a catch-all for how to preside through a meeting that allows for discussion but still allows for effectiveness. So just keep some of those things in mind as you're going through, and as you're starting, and it's definitely a process learned. This will not, if this is your first time being a chapter president, this will not go as well as you think it's going to go. But take some time to reflect after meetings. Did I offer good discussion? Was it effective? Those are some things and some discussions you can have with yourself that'll really be helpful through that. So at this point, let's kind of wrap up on micro questions. If you have any questions, feel free to write those down. We're going to have a quick discussion after Haley goes a little bit into macro discussions. So I'm now going to turn the virtual mic over to Nicole.
Hey everyone. All right, so that's kind of a good overview of micro planning. And for me, it's very important to talk about what we're calling macro planning. So a good way to think about this is vision planning, goal planning, that kind of thing. So not goal setting, but goal planning. So an overview are kind of the layers of goals. So all of the different various goals you should have in mind as chapter president. And then a lot of things to stay aware of as you're planning your goals and as you're checking on your progress. So things like feedback, tunnel vision, the me agenda, the goal versus the actual process of getting to your goal, and checkpoints along the way. Okay, so for layers of goals, there's a ton of different layers that I think are actually incredibly valuable to consider rather than just thinking about your own chapter. So each district has some sort of written out goal or vision or idea that they're pursuing. If you don't already know it, I'd reach out to your district officers and ask them what they're working towards. This will help put your ideas as a chapter into context within your district. Next to that, you can also look at chapter goals as a member of your district. And that is separate from chapter goals as a component of your university and school, because thinking about what you're doing on a district level is not the same as abiding to what you're doing for your band program. Then you can look at chapter president goals. So what are you as an executive member wanting to work on? And then you can look at your executive board goals. So asking them directly, what are your goals? What are you working towards? What can I do to help you? And then last but not least, our individual brother goals. This is very important for you, I think, of any of the goals, because first and foremost, we are all brothers of Kappa Kappa Psi, and we need to know why we're here and what we're doing. And in the words of Simon Sinek, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. You need to know why you're here, you need to know why you're leading, and people will follow you when you know why you're doing it. And I put a little example on the bottom. That's all right. So for example, for each of these layers of goals, you can break it out into like an overall year goal, and then break it up into 3-month pieces. So like fall, winter, and spring. So once you get to the end of fall, you can readjust what you have for winter and spring and keep your goal planning very flexible. Okay, so the first thing to be aware of when you're goal planning, vision planning, is getting and receiving feedback. So you must be checking in with your e-board members and your chapter brothers. You're not the only one in your chapter, and everyone runs a little bit differently. So reach out to them directly and ask, how are you doing? Another thing is that what works for you will not always be the best method for your chapter. So if you can receive criticism and feedback directly and you're not offended, that's great, that's amazing. But it doesn't mean everyone is like that, or vice versa. Like, you've got to be willing to compromise, basically. The chapter is not there for you, you are there for the chapter, in a sense. And then you need to be able to receive constructive feedback, and this will actually guide your improvement. Whatever you're looking to improve, whether that's creating your agenda, organizing minutes, leading your chapter rather than talking at your chapter, ask for constructive feedback. Usually this is best done on like a one-on-one situation. And another actually really good thing of feedback is providing appropriate feedback to individual people. So if your VP does an amazing job at a presentation, go and talk to them. Let them know how they're doing, but make sure it's appropriate and not just criticisms. We're here to build each other up and empower one another. And holding the title of president comes with a lot of responsibility, and most of that is not what we are taught to do. Another thing to keep in mind is tunnel vision. This is definitely one of the largest pitfalls when planning out the year. So if you are planning the details of your goals, no matter what your goals are, if you are over planning the details, you will trap yourself. You just will. You're going to become too focused on exactly what you want to do and how you want to do it. But you need to leave room to be flexible and to be able to change or adjust your goals or your visions, your missions. Especially right now with COVID, every few weeks, at least by the end of the semester, by the end of the quarter, your goals and priorities will probably be changing. So it's very important that you adjust and kind of assess where you are. And for me, I like to kind of evaluate my priorities about every 3 months. So I have, in the previous example, there's fall, winter, and spring. So they're about 3-month pieces, or like 90 to 100 days. That will be a really good time to evaluate your progress towards your yearly goal. And kind of this last point is much of what we will plan for this year will change. So your goals must change too. The way you're going to be handling your year in the spring is going to be different than the fall. Hopefully in person, but you have to be adaptable. Kind of piggybacking off that is the me agenda. Remember, your job as chapter president is to do what's best for your chapter. It is not about what's best for you and only you and what's easiest. Your self-interests do not take precedence here. Our job as president is to figure out what's best for our chapter brothers. And to kind of make another interesting point is your goals as president are not the same as your chapter's goals. These are very individual things that need to work together. So your chapter goals, best way I like to handle this is open it up as a group discussion. Through Zoom, you can use breakout rooms or just have a group of people talking about, as a chapter, what do you want to look towards? What do you want to do? But you as president, your goals are not what need to be leading the chapter. That's going to start creating the me agenda. You know, you need to avoid focusing on only what you want to do. You're not going to be able to do every single thing you want to do this year. But instead, use the chapter's dialogue to guide your goal setting, your vision planning, and use that feedback. Thanks, Jacob. So the goal versus the process. So I have a link on the bottom, which is actually, funny enough, going to say don't set goals, because it's actually telling you to enjoy the process. It's not enough to just write down a sentence of what you want to do and then assume it's going to happen. You have to enjoy the process. And like the second point, the purpose of setting goals is to win the game. The thing about this, though, it's momentary. Once you achieve a goal, what's next? If you set a goal for the end of the year and your chapter achieves it, what happens if you don't set up a system for your chapter to continue? So again, adding on, the purpose of building systems is to continue playing the game. So this is sustainable. Kind of like Jacob said earlier with band banquets. You have to have a system in place to help guide your next year's group or your chapter or your band organization to learn from the previous year and to, you know, kind of continue on even stronger. Don't let your chapter rebuild the wheel every single year. And a phrase I really like from this article is, it is your commitment to the process that will determine your progress. So no one is asking about what goals did you set and did you meet them? Everyone is going to be asking you, hey, what have you done so far? What are you working on now? Where are you going now? That kind of thing. And you can take this on the district level, your executive board level. You can ask your chapter brothers. But people are going to see what you do on a daily basis, and it's the little things that matter. And then for me, the most important aspect of this is checkpoints and accountability. So you have to focus on the process of achieving the goal. You know, like this is life. This is what composes our daily interactions. This is why we stay where we are as brothers. And the two best ways I can think of to help actually enjoying the process and getting the process done is you have to create an accountability system for yourself, something that works for you, and you have to ask honest questions. These are very difficult to do because they usually identify where we're not as strong or where we're lacking, which is why it's not easy to do. It's not a tempting thing to do. But in the long run, when you identify where your strengths and weaknesses are, you and your chapter will be much better off for it. So I tend to think in questions. So some of the questions I will ask is, how should I hold myself accountable? Not should I hold myself accountable, but how? And what works best for me does not work the same way as my district officers and my chapter brothers and the other district presidents. Like, we're all individual when it comes to this. And even with my own chapter presidents, I've been asking them, how can I best communicate with you? Because for me, I will text everyone like every other day if I can and just go, hi, how's it going? But I've learned that that becomes just overpowering, and it actually deduces the level of interest in what I have to say and vice versa. And then if you're asking yourself, how do I kind of check in with my e-board? How do I make sure they're on time, they're making progress, or why they're having a hard time? ask yourself, how do I keep my executive board accountable in a respectful and productive way? And the only way to do this is to ask them. You do not assume that emails are the best way to do this. Do not assume text and Snapchat and direct messages through Instagram or Facebook are the best way to do this. Each person has the best way they'd like to be held accountable, or even just a hi message. And then even going a little further with asking honest questions, you want to be asking your chapter brothers, how are we doing so far? Like, what has been your experience? Because we're doing this for them, and they are there to help support the bands. So if they're not having a good time, they're not going to support our mission. They're not going to want to talk about us in a productive way. And we have to see how much progress we've made towards our goal and ask them. Ask your chapter brothers, ask yourself. And this would be a good time to adjust your goals or your visions. So when you're asking yourself, are we on track, or do we need to adjust our methods and activities? You need to catch this when you start feeling that doubt, or you start hitting that brick wall of no one's participating, no one wants to ask any questions. There's something going on. So usually as president, asking questions is one of the most effective ways to get information. And kind of like Jacob said, you have to set the scene so people are comfortable. So there's safe spaces and brave spaces. You have to set that scene as chapter president to do that for your brothers. Yeah, and that's basically summarizing the macro. So I kind of left this a little bit more vague in a sense, because this topic is a little bit more macro. So on the first slide, I put like examples you can make for each of those. And honestly, I would actually make a document for your executive board and see where they sit with everything and work together to create goals for the year. But yeah, thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you both so very much. If you could just go ahead and unshare your screen. We'll go through the Q&A portion now. But before we get into those questions, just a couple things I wanted to highlight again and reiterate. Being a chapter president isn't easy. Leading a group of people, it isn't easy. In a way, it's like, as you go through this chapter president experience, you're sort of, it's like a mini MBA that you're going through. It's not easy, but it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. I would say, if anything, especially when there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of issues of not knowing what's happening, I think keep it simple. Keep it simple as possible. So if you're looking at some things to incorporate into your chapter meetings because you aren't sure what's going to happen with your band program, focus on the growth of the individual brothers. So as you go through, have you considered, or have you maybe in the past brought in national speakers, district speakers to present on something, so that you could maybe bring in somebody from the ritual education committee to talk through the ritual? Have you considered bringing in somebody from the curriculum committee to talk through how to best teach the curriculum, even if you're not the VPM? Have you considered bringing in somebody from the founder circle to talk through leadership development? Have you considered bringing in somebody from whoever else, if you need help, like, emailing the council and say, hey, I would like for my chapter to have a lesson on Parley Pro, Robert's Rules, or, how do we go about discussing brotherhood? How do we go about, so it doesn't always have to be in your plate. I would say, as a chapter president, your job and goal is to ensure that your executive board is engaged in doing their job. But let's say there's not enough for them to do. Okay, then let's focus on how we can support them, bring in resources to help them grow. And there was a question that was asked when people submitted questions when you were all registering, is how do I focus on macro goals when I won't be there? after my term? I think that's a great question. I think what you have to think about is, are you setting and working towards goals that are sustainable? Are you putting in a goal that is contentious, that the chapter is not fully on board, something that the chapter is fully bought in, something that they want to continue, and that you start discussions of how are we going to continue this after this year? Maybe utilize a chapter meeting rather than just going through official business. Maybe, okay, do some officer reports, updates, and then from there, have them use breakout rooms or whatever system you use to start discuss how are we going to further these ideas, these goals, these projects. How do we get them to go further? And then from there, I would say focus on when it comes to furthering the goals past your term, is how are you growing the people that are on the bench? I'm sure there are people in your chapter you can see like they have so much potential. I can see them being this or that. How are you putting your energy and time into them? How are you creating a system where they are learning with the current officer? They're going through, they understand your thought process. And this ties into the question that was asked by Kylie here. Do you recommend sharing your president goals to the chapter, or should they be just for yourself? My personal opinion, and what I have seen work best across the board, is when you are communicative of your goals, two things happen. One, your chapter members understand your perspective a little bit more. I'm sure we have all seen where somebody comes in and like, hey, I want to do this. I want to change this up. I want to have this new idea, new goal. The chapter's a little bit resistant, right? Change is hard for a lot of people, so they're resistant. But if you explain, and not just share your goals, but if you explain why, like that was mentioned earlier, if you explain that why you want to do this, what your vision is for that goal, what the results are that you're looking for, you give people that perspective. They don't have to agree with you, but you give them that perspective to understand, to think about it. The second thing that happens is that you also give yourself the time to actually defend your goal. A lot of times and this happens on all levels, even on the national level, you see people running for national level and you see this great packet, all these great ideas. Great. How are you going to actually do it? I love your new ideas, but talk is cheap. How are you going to do it? How are you going to put it into action? Right? So a lot of times this gives you the ability to think through these goals and be like, you know what? Maybe that was actually a terrible idea. Maybe that's something that isn't a big priority. Right? A lot of times people want to do new things, innovative things, because that's how they want to stand out. But that's not always the best way to stand out, depending on the situation, right? So when it comes down to everything, again, reiterating, keep it simple. Continue to bring people into your conversations about how can we adjust. All right, as a president, you are up there leading the meeting, but that doesn't mean that you always have to lead the discussion. Get the e-board bought in, incorporate committee meetings into the chapter meetings if you can, so that way people have a smaller space to speak. Because I'm sure you all remember, if people are introverted, or maybe even as an extrovert, when I first joined the chapter, I didn't want to speak out because I didn't know enough to speak out. I didn't know Parley Pro to speak out. So break things up. Don't make it's in a sense, lower the barriers for people to actually share their thoughts and ideas. All right, and then try to incorporate different resources. If you are not an expert on something, you don't have to be. You can still have your chapter excel at many areas. Like right now, a lot of chapters are asking about discussions for people to come in and speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You don't have to be an expert. You have resources on the national front, on the district front, on your own campus. All right, so we'll go ahead and open the floor up for further questions, about 20 minutes of questions. If you don't have any questions right here and now, that's okay. I'll read off the list. But what I'll challenge our speakers to do is, you both don't have to answer the question unless it's like completely different views, just to share that perspective. But if it's the same view, we'll just go ahead and go on to the next one, okay? So the floor is open for any questions.
See, I have one real quick.
Yeah.
Specifically pertaining to formulating guiding questions that don't reveal your bias, yet still encourage further discussion.
Sure. Really quickly, if I could jump in, Jacob, I know you have something here. This is something that people in the professional world are still learning. It is actually a really difficult skill to learn, but you can practice it. And my tip that I have learned myself is don't focus so much on the yes or no. Like the presidents have said, focus on the process. So it's like, tell me more about that. Or why do you think this? Or how do you think this? Or, hey, I want you to do this. Great. What does that look like when you achieve it? So I would say focus more on the question to further the process, to essentially like open up the blinds a little bit so you can kind of see, because sometimes you asking those questions can help them kind of say, well, you know what, maybe that was a terrible idea. So Jacob, I think you had something to add.
Cool. Actually, I was going to first, Jacob, could you give like an example of one thing that you would like, one thing that typically comes up in your chat that you talk about? What is like one general topic? I'm going to try to relate it to like, I'm going to try to quote unquote lead a mini question off of it.
Saying just any topic.
Any topic whatsoever.
Let's say developing brotherhood.
Cool. Great. So in the first question that would like typically come to most of our minds are, how do we want to develop brotherhood or leadership within our chapter? Or like, how do we want to develop this? That is the first thing that you're going to want, because it's the question you have, it's the question you ask. Some things, and I totally agree with Wong, as to if someone brings it to you, the first and easiest thing to do is explore their opinions more. And that's kind of how I word it. Explore their opinions to gather their knowledge. That's definitely something I would like agree with and snap to. But another way to view this is, I'm going to word it by, I'm going to call it proposing a neutral idea. And by that, as a chapter president, you probably have a general feel for how your chapter feels. And on most issues, there's usually a very common ground that kind of everyone is stemming from, because as brothers, we have general morals, ideas, and values that we all find similarly. To try to ask the question closest to the middle and see the way different people interact with the middle. So instead of just asking, and actually a really simple one, instead of just going, how should we improve, because you said leadership development?
Brotherhood.
Okay, brotherhood.
Both of those.
So instead of going, how could we improve brotherhood, go with the question of, how would you guys currently view brotherhood within our chapter? I might be frozen. Okay, did you hear that?
I think so. There's.
Okay, yeah. There's a little bit of connection on my side. But instead of asking the question of, what do you think we could do better, ask, can you reflect on what we currently do? That allows brothers to give their opinions on how it's currently going, and that might guide questions later into the future. So kind of gathering the knowledge and asking the neutral question first. Does that help?
Yes, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you, Jacob Cornhusker. Jacob McGee, if there are things that you want further coaching on and help with, reach out to your district presidents, or really any of them. Maybe some like another district president may give you a different perspective. Reach out to your governors, your national officers, and just say, hey, can we set up a time to practice some of these discussions? Or even just say, if you don't want to practice, look, I don't want this on my plate. Say, hey, would you mind coming in for 30 minutes or so and just helping guide some discussions on this? And just getting that conversation started. So those are some resources for you. I know it can be so terrifying to reach out to these individuals, because even as a national officer, there are people that I am terrified to talk to. I get it. Like, I am 27. Some of these people are, boomer age range. I'm so sorry, I'm just recording. But I love you all. It is scary to reach out, but leverage your district council and say, like, hey, who would be best for this? All right, this goes for everybody. Right? If you want to talk about, like, how do we do virtual recruiting? How do we do this? Right? There are ways we can work through these questions. Now, the pivot stuff, that's a whole different beast that we are unpacking in a very different way. So, great question. I'm going to move on. You gonna get beat up? Well, I've had those threats before. Okay. So, how often and long should executive board meetings ideally be? I'll jump in with something really quick as the DPs are thinking. I think you need to ask yourself, what is that meeting for? My biggest pet peeve when it comes to being a leader, but also like not a leader in that sense, is that people tell me to come to these meetings because it's a consistent thing, it's a norm, and it just ends up them talking at me like, here are the decisions I've already made. Cool, you honestly could have done that via email. Please stop wasting my time. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but my time is my time. So if you can do this over email, I hope and pray that we can do that next time. So I think as the president, you need to ask yourself, what is this for? In some of the successful chapters, big and small, universities who have big and small bands all across the country, the most success I've seen are presidents who turn their exec meetings into quick updates, but then a like personal leadership, professional development sort of thing. They start to ask these like bigger questions and get their officers to really unpack that. And one meeting will kind of dig into the next meeting, which will lead to the next meeting. It's an ongoing conversation. And you start to really see not just one president, but you start to see a multitude of like, wow, these individuals could all be presidents. And that's what we see from some of the most successful chapters. So DPs, anything to add?
Yes, because this is what I struggle with. Because I can talk and talk and talk, and it's therapeutic for me, but really annoying to other people. So especially with my district council this year, I aim to actually have 30-minute meetings, but the meeting will actually go an hour long. If I know that doesn't make sense, but the reason I do that is I schedule enough time for us to talk about why we see something this way, what blockers are we encountering. So no matter what you have written down, it will take longer to discuss. So unless there's a lot of material, I will not go over an hour and a half because that's just not the way our heads work. So I stick to an hour max. Like it's just too much when everyone has work and school and chapter business and personal life and relationships and friends and all of that. You need to stick to the basics, what you're there for. Like my past 2 district council meetings have been through email because we just don't need to meet. And we've just been spending the time messaging and sending memes across the way. And now we're updated. Like it doesn't have to be a sit down face to face through Zoom every single time. It gets tedious and it loses its value after a few months. So I'd say no more than an hour. Like, if you have more than an hour's worth of stuff, then something's going wrong, or you need to meet more often at shorter pieces, like make it manageable, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think people's attention span will start to really decay over time. And you just look at the way, I always look at real life as an example of what not to do. And there are examples of, Fortune 500 companies out there that are starting to learn about how mental health plays a big part, how people's cultures play a big part, right? Like, should you do all your meetings on Sunday? No. So incorporating different times of the day, and also incorporating in like, hey, let's just, like, in some of your exec meetings can just be, let's talk, let's get to know each other. Or you just say, all right, we're not going to meet as a full exec. I'm going to schedule one-on-one meetings with your officers. That's a great way to get to know them and get to understand like how they feel about some things, because sometimes things can get pretty contentious when people are already like so frustrated with how life is. Like it could cause a lot of issues. So get to know them, get a better understanding of who they are. All right. Next question is, what's the most important thing to plan for / when planning and setting goals? How far down the road should the longest goal be? 1 to 2 years or less than that? Okay. So as the DPs are thinking about this, I will say that to me, the most important thing as a president to plan for is the development of your e-board. My opinion on this is that if you can get your e-board to function at a high level and to be confident in their positions, then that takes off so much off of your plate. So what can you do to coach them, to guide them through, to be that ear, that shoulder when they need you, and to continue to encourage them, to continue to ask them those guiding questions? That, I think, is the most important thing. And when it comes to the goal length, I think it's going to honestly really depend. But when you're thinking of long-term goals, I think if you really want it to be successful long-term, the group that you really need to get to buy in into be the most involved in those goals are your incoming class, because they're the ones that are going to carry that tradition, those goals forward, right? It's great to get your seniors and your juniors involved. I think that's great because they're the most knowledgeable and skillful. However, you need to get that class, the incoming class, in and bought in, and to make sure that they are fully involved. So, DP's anything to add?
I'm just going to touch on one brief part of it, and it's the what should my goals be about part. This short answer is, and this is going to sound really dumb, but whatever you and your e-board believe the chapter needs. Every chapter is in a different place, and that is totally okay. Acknowledge that there's nothing it's supposed to be about. It's about growth from where you currently are, and growth in any faction. Goals are just meant to be for growth. So as long as you can say, here's where my chapter needs to grow and where it can go, it could be structural. It could be our brotherhood needs to improve. It could be we don't have officer transition handbooks. There could be so many different things it's about, but what it's about is just growth. So having that growth mindset is where I would tell you to focus in. And I think Nicole might have some opinions on like length of goals.
I always have opinions. What I found the most useful is the longer out your goal is. So if you're kind of reaching like 6 months to a year and your goal setting, it's going to end up being a little bit more vague. Like it's going to be almost more like a vision of an ideal of something you want to strive for. You know, strive for the highest. Like it's a never-ending process. However, when you start doing like weekly goals, monthly goals, 3-month goals, you can be a little bit more tangible and not so much materialistic, but you can start including names, dates, values, budgets in a sense, and really keep an eye on the progress almost day to day. So that's kind of where the flexibility comes in, is as you're going towards your long-term goal, you can make the progress and you can adjust your goals and visions at any point. But I would just say if you're doing a goal for next week, it shouldn't be something like run a marathon if you've never run before. It should be something very tangible, very doable a week from now. In a year, you can ride a marathon. As a very weird example, but that's kind of my approach to goal setting long term.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you both. All right. We'll wrap up with a few more questions here. So the next question, or the next two, really have to do, I think, very similar. What are some strategies to find balance between micro and macro planning, and how do you instill macro and micro planning managing into your chapter operations? So as DPs are thinking here, I think it's really important to understand how the smaller goals, the Lego pieces, start to build into the big picture, into the final product. So for me, I would say I'm not a very detail-oriented person, because for me, at the end of the day, I know that someone probably out there is going to be able to do a better job. My job is to focus on the bigger picture. So I have to really train myself to be okay with letting go of those smaller goals. So let's say you have a chapter discussion and you have defined what your big goal is. And one question I love to ask is, if we get nothing done this year, what is that one thing that we can accomplish and we say that was a great year? And have people digest, think, debate on that. And I would encourage debate on that, because people need to know, like, are the things that we've been taught to feel are important, are they really that important? Have people debate, have people discuss, maybe smaller groups, maybe an open forum, whatever that may look like. Something that I use in the professional world, I call a 411. I take a look at my big goals. What are those big goals? And then I look at the month. All right, so I'm planning for September. What are the things that I need to achieve each week? And from there, I look at, all right, what's the one action I can take each day, even if it's a few minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, that will add to that. I know a lot of times when you take a look at being a chapter president, there's that administrative side where we have to organize files and get meetings minutes together, get reports together. Well, how about you take a moment, you say, my first week, I'm just gonna look and make sure I know where everything is. Second week, I'm gonna start organizing them to see, all right, I need to do this, this, and this. From there, I'm actually gonna complete the reports. I'm actually gonna, fill out whatever files I need to, send out any emails I need to. And then that last week, I'm gonna send it to people to make sure that it looks all good. Have people check. So for me, I think it's more important to plan for the bigger goal and then to leverage your exec board and your brothers to put in the work that they believe is best to achieve those goals. So if you can leverage the chapter members and your e-board to accomplish or work towards their goals, not only are you getting them engaged, but you're also allowing them to learn through the process. And if they go it about the same way you would have, fantastic. If they go a different way, also fantastic. But allowing them, your chapter members, to feel like I am a part of this chapter because I helped achieve these small goals, which played a part in the big picture. So again, these are just my personal philosophies, as I have failed many, many times as chapter president. I have failed many times as district president and as VPSA. So this is just from, I guess it's more of a reality check for myself, but for you all as well. So DPs, any thoughts?
Honestly, just same thing Bong said is where I'm at.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Best way I can summarize this is, as president, you may or may not be aware of this, but we are no longer the doers in the chapter. We are the overseers. I don't like the word, but some people will use the word managers in a sense, but you work long-term goals. Utilize your e-boards to do that work, more or less.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. So before I get to this last question here presented by Robert, I did want to make a quick announcement that we have our third and final part of chapter president training on the 23rd, and that will be over leadership traits and tools. And the reason we think that's important is because at the end of the day, you need to grow as a human being. You need to grow simply as yourself, and the more you can grow there, you can grow as a chapter president. So times are hard. I myself just had a very hard week, and I honestly didn't want to do much more. And you will have your ups and downs as human beings. You're gonna have moments where family issues get in the way, work issues, money, whatever that is. We're human, life sucks right now. So we want to bring to you some leadership tools and traits that will help at least keep you somewhat on that road, the road that I can't really mention right now, but that path, okay? So we also have the first part of our VPM training tomorrow at 7 p.m. Central Time. It's going to be a panel with Jessica, our VPCM, Calum, the SED governor, Kat, who is the NCD VPM. And they're going to be going over the pivot guidelines. So if your VPM has questions about recruitment, about ritual, whatever that may be, please send them to this. It will be recorded, but I think it's always better to have them there and actually get the responses that at least have it answered or not answered. Okay, so I will put the link here in just a bit, but the last question here, if there are DPs can take care of this, how do you balance wanting to move the chapter towards big goals while, especially now, some brothers may not want to put in that work? I know not everyone cares about KKSI as much as I do, and may just want KKSI to be a place to relax. Thoughts?
I have so many thoughts. So for starters on this one, your last sentence is something to really keep in mind. I know that not everyone might care as much about KKSI as I do. That is honestly the most important statement in the question itself. There will not be, most likely, very many people in the chapter that are more dedicated to the entirety of the chapter than you are. That's one of the reasons why you'd be president. Makes total sense. What I would encourage you to do is encourage people to be very active in the spots that they are passionate about. If someone's really passionate about wanting a place to relax, wanting a place for brotherhood, cool. Let brotherhood be one of the things they focus on. Don't require them to focus on the service project that they just don't want to do because they want a place to relax. Now, some brothers are going to be super dedicated. So I guess it's mainly just dispersing the groups to allow them to be dedicated and where they're currently passionate about it. That's one of the easiest ways for people to still get involved without feeling overly involved, because that is definitely something you're going to run into this year. Is Kappa's a place with me and my brothers. Honestly, some bands aren't happening at all. Some bands are not the way they want it to be. This is just a time that I can spend with band people. Allow them to spend it the way they want to. And that might be, and honestly, this year for some brothers, that might just be going to the meetings and being present. But if that's serving them in the capacity they want, you're still doing your job as president. Now, in relation to how do we get towards those big goals still, the best advice would be utilize those who share those big goals that you have and just work through it as a slow process. I know that's not the answer we all want to hear. We all want to be the chapter president that accomplished everything we wanted to accomplish. But some of right now is acknowledging we're not going to quite hit all those perfectly. And one of the biggest things to focus on is our brothers and their well-being and them getting what they need out of your chapter. I'd say those are some of my beginning opinions.
I appreciate that.
The way I'm approaching this year is very new to me, which is I'm asking people why they're a brother. Why is it important to them? What do they get from this? And kind of revisiting the ritual a little bit, having those discussions rather than just throwing out details and goals and paperwork and conversations and emails at people. They're going to want to do that work when they feel connected to Kappa Kappa Psi. And for me, revisiting those conversations tends to be a really good way to kind of let people remember what's important to them. And just like Jacob said, focusing on the individual and their well-being is the best foundation you can create as a president. Everything stems off of the connection you have with your brothers.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you both so very much. To everyone who attended, please, if you have a moment, thank our two presenters on putting the time and the effort into this. If you've taken a look at the chapter president officer manual, it is dense. I myself have tried many times to go through it, and I get to page 3, I'm like, I'm out. It's too much, right? So they are taking the time to break down the most essential for you. Just know that this will not stop after the 3rd series. We'll take a break, regroup, and see what do our chapter officers need, and we'll come back with training around the November time period. If you take a look at the chat right now, I put 2 links up there. One is for your VPM training. That will be the panel, once again, to go over COVID guidelines. The last link is for the 3rd part of our president training. So if you haven't already signed that up or pass it on to the respective officers, please do. This is open not just for the officers, but for anybody who's looking to learn. All right, and I'll make a quick note about Pivot. As of right now, the Pivot guidelines, we've been working very closely with the fraternity lawyer and insurance provider. It says the word should. Should means should, not must. If your university says that you can meet in person, we hope that you will follow, the guidelines, follow COVID, blah, blah, blah. You know the routine. But just know that we can't force people to be there in person if they don't want to be in person, if they don't feel safe. We can't penalize people because they want to be safe. All right, so make sure that you have a backup for people who don't want to be there in person to still engage. Make sure that you're reviewing make sure you're reviewing your bylaws about quorum. Like how many people, how many officers do you need to be there to meet a quorum for it to be an official meeting? And then lastly, if you need a Zoom account while you're figuring out how your university can provide you with that, please reach out. We have resources for that. If you need help with just the tech piece of things, please let us know. We'll connect you with our tech people, okay? We hope you found this helpful. This does not answer all the questions, but I hope that it gives some dialogue started. I hope that you will continue to ask questions. These trainings, the things that we're doing is because of the questions people are asking. All right, we want to be here for you. We want to make sure that you are supported. We're not going to get everything accomplished, but at least we'll move in the right direction. Okay. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and you will see an email from me Monday. All right, peace out, y'all.